You remember the day you voted guilty. You remember exactly how it felt. The pen in your hand, the form on the table, the foreman reading the verdict out loud. Guilty. You believed it then. Every single one of you did. 12 people in a room, and not one of you hesitated. That was 7 years ago. Today, a moving truck pulled into the house next door. You watched from your kitchen window, coffee going cold in your hand. A man stepped out. He was thinner than you remembered. Older. He moved slowly, like someone who had learned not to rush. And then he turned around. You recognized him immediately. His name is Daniel Marsh. And 7 years ago, you helped put him in prison for a crime he says he didn't commit. The question isn't whether he remembers you. He does. You saw it in his eyes the moment he looked up. The question is, what does he plan to do about it? Let's go back to the beginning. Because if you're going to understand what's happening now, you need to understand what happened then. The case seems simple. That was the first thing that should have worried you, but it didn't. Daniel Marsh, 34 years old, accused of aggravated assault and armed robbery. The victim, a convenience store owner named Ray Hollis, identified Daniel from a lineup. There was a partial fingerprint on the counter. There was a witness, a woman named Carol Pines, who placed Daniel 2 blocks from the store that night. The prosecution had 3 pieces. They built a wall out of them. The defense had almost nothing. Daniel's alibi was his girlfriend, and the prosecution spent 40 minutes making her look like a liar. His public defender was young, visibly overwhelmed, and mispronounced the victim's name twice during closing arguments. You noticed. Everyone noticed. Deliberations lasted 4 hours. You weren't the first to say guilty, but you weren't the last either. You were somewhere in the middle, which is where people go when they want to feel like they didn't really decide anything. There was one juror, a retired teacher named Margaret, who hesitated. She asked twice whether the fingerprint was a full match. She was told it was a partial. She asked what that meant. Nobody in the room knew exactly. The foreperson moved the conversation forward. Margaret voted guilty in the end. So did you. 7 years. That's what your 4 hours of deliberation cost Daniel Marsh. And now he's carrying a box of his belongings up the front steps of the house next door. And you're standing in your kitchen wondering if you should lock the door. But here's what you don't know yet. Daniel Marsh didn't come back to this neighborhood by accident. You looked him up the night he moved in. Of course you did. You typed his name into the search bar at 11 p.m. with the lights off and your phone face down on the table first. Like you needed a second to prepare yourself. And what you found didn't make you feel better. It made everything worse. Daniel Marsh was exonerated 14 months ago. The Innocence Project took his case in year 5 of his sentence. Took them 2 years to pull it apart. Here's what they found. The witness, Carol Pines, had given a different description of the perpetrator to the first officer on the scene. A description that did not match Daniel Marsh. That report was in the case file. It was never presented to the defense. The prosecution had it. They chose not to share it. The fingerprint, the partial print that the jury treated like a confession, was later matched to a second individual. A man with 2 prior robbery convictions who had been in that store 3 days before the crime. He was never investigated. And the victim's identification, the one that anchored everything, was conducted using a photo lineup procedure that had since been flagged in 2 other cases in the same county as improperly suggestive. The detective who ran it had retired under investigation. 3 pillars. All 3 cracked. A judge reviewed the case and overturned the conviction. No retrial was ordered. Daniel Marsh walked out of Crestfield Correctional on a Tuesday morning in March, after 7 years, with a paper bag of belongings and no formal apology from anyone. You read all of this on your phone in the dark. And when you put the phone down, the first thing you felt wasn't guilt. It was something quieter and harder to name. Something that felt like the floor shifting under you. Because if Daniel is innocent, and the court now says he is, then 12 people put an innocent man in prison. And one of those people lives 30 feet from his front door. You think that's the worst of it. But level 3 is where this stops being about the past. 3 days after he moved in, Daniel Marsh said hello to you. You were taking the bins out on a Wednesday morning. He was on his porch with a coffee. He looked at you and he nodded. That's all. One nod. But his eyes stayed on yours for exactly 1 second longer than a stranger's would. He knows. You went back inside and sat down at the kitchen table for 20 minutes without doing anything. You had 3 options and you knew it. You could avoid him entirely, reroute your routines, stop using the front door, pretend he doesn't exist. You could speak to a lawyer. Or you could go over there and face it directly. You did none of those things. Not yet. Instead you called your sister, who is the only person in your life who knows you served on that jury. You told her what happened. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then she said something you weren't ready for. You need to go talk to him. You told her that was insane. She said, maybe, but imagine it from his side. You didn't sleep well that night. You kept thinking about what she said. And somewhere around 3 a.m. it occurred to you that you had spent 7 years not thinking about Daniel Marsh, not once, not seriously, and that he had spent 7 years thinking about almost nothing else. The next morning, you walked across the yard and knocked on his door. He opened it like he was expecting you. I wondered how long it would take, he said. He didn't look angry. That was the thing that broke something open in your chest. He didn't look angry at all. He looked tired in a way that went all the way down. He let you in. What he told you inside that house changed everything you thought you understood about what happened in that courtroom. And it started with a name you had never heard before. Daniel sat down across from you and put a folder on the table. He didn't open it right away. He just rested his hand on it. I don't want an apology, he said. I want you to understand what actually happened. He told you that he had known, from the first week of his sentence, that the trial wasn't just flawed, it was steered. He didn't use the word corrupt. He was careful about the words he used. But he said that someone had made deliberate choices that shaped what the jury saw and what it didn't. The witness who placed him 2 blocks from the store, Carol Pines, had come forward voluntarily. Unusually voluntarily. Daniel's Innocence Project attorney had found a text message, recovered from a phone backup during a separate criminal investigation, between Carol Pines and the lead detective on the case, sent 4 days before she gave her statement. The message said only, "You'll be taken care of." She was never charged. The detective was never charged. The case file was closed when Daniel was exonerated. Not reopened. Daniel opened the folder. Inside was a printed photograph. A man in his 50s, business casual, standing outside what looked like a municipal building. That's the detective, he said. He lives 11 minutes from here. He coaches youth soccer on Saturdays. You looked at the photograph. You didn't know what Daniel expected you to do with it. I'm not showing you this because I want something from you, he said. I'm showing you because you're one of 12 people who made a decision based on information that was controlled. You weren't wrong because you were stupid. You were wrong because you were set up to be wrong. You didn't know what to say. So you asked the only question that felt honest. Why did you move here? He looked at you for a long moment. Because this is where I'm from, he said. I'm not going to leave my own neighborhood because it's uncomfortable for the people who put me away. There was nothing aggressive in how he said it. That was almost harder to take than if he'd been furious. You left his house 20 minutes later, and standing on your own front step, you realized something that had not occurred to you before. Daniel Marsh being innocent doesn't automatically make you a villain in this story. But what you do next might. Because level 5 is the question you've been avoiding since the moment you saw him step off that moving truck. Here's where you actually are. You served on a jury. You followed the process. You were presented with evidence that had been curated, shaped, and in at least one case deliberately withheld. You deliberated. You voted. You did what citizens are asked to do. And an innocent man spent 7 years in prison. The legal system has already processed this. Daniel was exonerated. The case is closed. You have no legal liability. No one is coming for you. From a purely procedural standpoint, you did nothing wrong. But you're standing in your kitchen again, and the house next door has a light on, and you know the name of a detective who sent a text message that may have manufactured a witness, and you know that no one with authority is currently doing anything about it. So what do you do? Option 1, nothing. You absorb what you've learned, you process the guilt, you maybe donate to the Innocence Project, and you find a way to live with the knowledge that the system failed and you were inside it when it did. This is what most people choose. It is not nothing, sitting with that weight is genuinely hard. But it changes nothing outside of you. Option 2, you go to the press. Daniel's case was covered locally when he was exonerated. But the detective's name never appeared in print. You have nothing concrete. Daniel has a printed photograph and a description of a text message recovered in a separate case. That's thin. A journalist might be able to do something with it. Or it might go nowhere and the detective coaches soccer on Saturdays for the rest of his career. Option 3, you go back to Daniel and you ask him what he actually needs. Not what you can do to ease your own conscience, what does he need? Maybe it's a witness who can corroborate how he was treated in those early days. Maybe it's someone who can make calls on his behalf. Maybe it's nothing you can offer. But you ask. None of these options fixes what happened. Daniel Marsh lost 7 years. That is not recoverable. The specific weight of that 7 years of his life removed does not have a remedy that fits inside any of these choices. But here's the question underneath all the other questions. The one this whole situation is really asking you. What is your actual obligation when you participate in a system that fails? Not a legal obligation. Not a procedural one. The one that lives in the part of you that knows the difference between what you did wrong and what was done wrong through you. Because those are not the same thing. And how you answer that question, not in theory, not in the abstract, but in the specific case of the man living 30 feet from your front door, that's the thing you're going to have to figure out. You didn't put Daniel Marsh in prison. A compromised detective and a coached witness and an overwhelmed public defender and a process that nobody in that jury room understood well enough to challenge. Those things put Daniel Marsh in prison. You were one vote among 12. You were a mechanism, not a cause. But you're not a mechanism anymore. You're a person standing in a kitchen with a name, a photograph, and a neighbor who looked at you across a folder and told you the truth. What you do with that is entirely up to you. And that's exactly what makes it so hard. Daniel Marsh didn't ask you to save him. He doesn't need saving, not anymore. He's out. He's home. He's making coffee on his porch in the morning and nodding at you over the fence and building whatever comes next with the years he still has left. But you're going to see him every day. You're going to put your bins out on Wednesday mornings and he's going to be there. And every time you're going to have to decide freshly again who you are in relation to what happened. That's not punishment. Nobody sentenced you to this. It's just the shape of the situation. It's what happens when the consequences of a broken system don't stay in the courtroom where they were made. When they move in next door and make eye contact over a cup of coffee. The jury system asks 12 strangers to bear collective responsibility for a verdict. What it doesn't prepare any of them for is what to do when that verdict turns out to be wrong, and the person who bore the cost of it ends up being more decent about it than you expected. Daniel Marsh moved home because it's his neighborhood. The question is what kind of neighbor you're going to be.